Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Amos Wilson, Elijah Malik Shabazz, our big brother Louis Rivera, Khalid Abdul Muhammad, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, Brother Harold, Sister Leola Maddox, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune, who basically went beyond the call of duty to bring history to the people. Read thousands of books. They didn't have to do that. But they did. Mike, see if that mic is on. Let's see if that video, clip is on.
I can't tell if the mic is on.
Yeah, it's on.
So they gave up a lot. We honor these people. We never want them to be forgotten. And then that's why we keep the William Mackey Jr. History Club, Mackey's to the Third, because it's about information, it's about communicating with the public, the global black community. So, I got a couple of books here. I'm gonna announce, and we have these books. The Amos Collection, the Help Brother Survival of African World Info Systems. We sell these books because we have information. So we can replenish them through African World Info Systems so Amos' name could be kept. The books are here. So in honor of Survival in African World Info Systems, we have Amos' classic, Blueprint for Black Power. It's a big book and it's a good read. And you won't ask a whole lot of questions. Also from the Amos collection. Issues of manhood in black and white. Also from the Amos collection. African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. Amos' classic, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. And from what I understand, Sababa is redoing this one, and it's going to be real good. Also, the falsification of African consciousness, Eurocentric history, psychiatry, and the politics of white supremacy. You know, family, you hear a lot about black-on-black violence. Every politician, every person running for governor or any elected office, regular people in the street, black-on-black violence. Oh, it's unbelievable. When is it going to stop? I'm scared to ride the trains. I'm scared to do this and that. That's the Amos Wilson who wrote this book, Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamic of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. This book has been out for years. And you never hear anybody speak on it. You never hear it. We have this book. Amos' classic that Sababa did, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat toward a Reformation of the African Mind. This is another great book that Sababa finished. We have, in honor of Louis Rivera, who spoke down here for years after Professor Mackey left us too soon. And I swear, it would be 3 or 4 of us and he would speak for hours. Historians can talk for hours. So he wrote this book, Jazz in Jail. This is in honor of Louis Rivera. We have our sister, Etta Dixon, I'm a wellness witness. This is a good book. Also, Confronting the Color Crisis in the African Diaspora by Louis Spencer Saxman. We have A Social History as Seen Through the Use and Abuse of Dirt, Terrence McLaughlin. This is a hard book to get. In honor of Dr. Randy Short, the impact of religious slavery revealed. We have this, Dr. Randy Short. Sister Carol Alexander, the unspoken truth of our racial divide, white rage. In honor of the great Dr. Ben. They didn't have too many computers at this time. Black man of the Nile and his family, Dr. Ben. S.K. Damiano Kruum, Distorted Truths, the Bastardization of African Cosmology. Also an excellent read. In honor of Charles Hamilton Houston, we have The Groundwork, Charles Hamilton Houston and the Struggle for Civil Rights, where a lot of people is getting civil rights today and they ain't even have to struggle. But when you read Charles Hamilton, you see what we had to go through. Brother Edward Black, The Transfer Agreement, the untold story of the secret pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine. We have a book here by Tim Wise, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. Theodore Allen, The Invention of the White Race. This is a good book. So we have all these books here. Now, The Irritated Genie, Jews Are the Problem. He just came out with this book. This is a small read, but it's one of the most powerfulest publications that Genie came out with. We have a few here, but you go on War on the Horizon, and you could get this book on War on the Horizon, The Irritated Genie. Ayo Kamadi did an excellent job on this book. The research from it is unbelievable, because you will read the book fast, but the research on it will blow your mind. Dr. Scott Whitaker, Medicine, the causes and solutions to disease, malnutrition, and the medical sins that are killing the world. This is an excellent book. He's out of Atlanta, Georgia. So you hear a lot of stuff about COVID-19 and all the stuff that's going on, lockdown. These two publications is excellent. Dr. McCullough and Ronald Cummings, The Truth About COVID-19, Exposing the Great Reset, Lockdown, Vaccine Passports, and the New Normal. And this is a power-packed book. The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr. Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. If you ever want to get any publications, these are must read if you want to know what's going on today. So we have these books, and we have a few information to the community, because that's one of the things that we give to the community. Get that phone here, Yasmin? That's my phone. Okay, tomorrow, Ted, Keisha, and Ashe, Thorough Black Talk. That comes on Facebook Live at 8 o'clock. Excellent program. Now we're going to come down to our Philadelphia family, Blog Talk Radio, with Sister Empress Chi. That's Saturdays at 10:30. You type in Blog Talk Radio, you put in Sister Empress Chi, you scroll down to New Day Resurrection, and that program starts at 10:30, and our Philadelphia family goes at it. So we want to give a big thanks to Sister Empress Chi, because she goes beyond the call of duty. Also, on Mondays, at 10 o'clock in the morning, The Irritated Genie, Ayo Kamati, has a program called Kamante Live, Sankofa Revolutionary Radio out of Birmingham, Alabama. WSYPLP 95.1 FM, African Perspective, Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. Also, our Baltimore connection, Brother Darren Muhammad, State of the City, Tune In Radio, Saturdays at 12 o'clock, and he also comes on either Wednesday or Thursday on Instagram and Facebook Live, Mohammed the Camel. But the Saturday program on TuneIn Radio, Glen Burnie, WEBR 1590 AM, it's an excellent program. Tuesdays, Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Project. That's a good program. If you email me your email, I'll send you the information on that. Also, Semotep with Brother James McIntosh. If you go into Semotep website, he will send you the information that he has on his radio program. What's that radio program? BAI?
99.5.
Mind Flight.
Mind- His radio program.
Minefield.
Minefield, Dr. McIntosh Minefield. That's an excellent program on WBAI.
When?
Also,
When?
Community Cop,
Wednesdays, 2 o'clock.
Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. Also, Community Cop with Brother Mike Graves, Noel Lee, and Julian Harper. That program comes on Tuesdays at 5 o'clock, Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Also, Fridays, African Echoes. Brother Trust Graham and the African Echoes family out of Newark, New Jersey. They have one of the most powerful study groups out. If you send me your email, you can log in on Fridays and then get your information to Brother Danny, and he will send you the link for the Friday group. Also, family, Saturday, the Know Thyself study group out of Asbury Park. Trust Graham is the mediator of that program with Brother True and his crew out at Asbury Park. They have a wonderful bunch of guys, and they have a study group that they come on Saturday. And the book that they're going through is The Destruction of Black Civilization with Chancellor Williams. That's an excellent study group. Put your email in the chat. You can log on Saturday, give your email to Brother True, and that program is off the hook. When you listen to Brother Trust Graham, and you think you're doing some studying, it gives you a whole new different perspective. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to have one of our own. Brother Mike Graves has been on the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club on numerous occasions. You can view all of the Community Cop lectures on YouTube titled Community Cop. You can also view all the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club lectures on YouTube, BK William Mackey Jr. History Club. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, give our keynote speaker, Brother Mike Graves, a great big hand, and his topic is the role of the Black church.
Okay, he said, let him in, he can't get in. This is Mikhail, he said he can't get in. He said, okay.
Say I am.
I am.
Because we are.
Of course we are.
I am.
I am.
Because we are.
Of course we are.
Thankful once again to be at the William Mackey, Brother Dr. William Mackey's lecture group, History Club. It's good to be here because it's important to continue his work. Oftentimes we hear very nice words about Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark so often that we forget there was a large team, whether it's Dr. Amos Wilson, who we honor here, so much work done by so many that there's such a long list of those that we honor and respect so much that oftentimes, we don't get to hear all the names. We hear Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark's name, and that's good because they deserve that so much, but there's more to it than just them. You gotta Also remember Dr. Jeffries, who's still with us, thank God. Dr. Adelaide Sanford, who's still with us. We lost Dr. Francis Questlewellman, Dr. Newton, Patricia Newton, but there are many names, and they were all in a continuum. They were all together in a real sense, because each of them helped us to get from point A to point B and point C to point D, and so on and so on. So it took all of them to wake us up, and some of us still could use some awakening. However, so many of us have heeded the call, and those that are here tonight did not think that it would be a bad judgment to come here tonight. And there are those who are probably on their way and want to acknowledge and thank the viewing audience on Zoom. Now, I don't know who's on Zoom, but I did hear a familiar voice. And I believe that voice was Brian. So I know that Brian from the Mighty Semotep organization is viewing this. And that's good, because I love Semotep. The contributions that Semotep has made is endless. And we should always acknowledge and adhere to those who speak of Semotep, because they've done a great work, and certainly it's so more to be done. But to Dr. McIntosh and Sister Betty Dobson, salute you to the max for all that great work. Now, it's been a while since I've spoke here. I'm always in attendance, but it's been a while since I spoke here, and there were a lot of things that has happened and a lot of things that are going on. And I thought of, it took me all the way until this weekend when Brother Ray called me and said, what do you want to focus on and basically speak about? And there's a whole lot of things that down the road that I have in mind, and that I think it bears our attention. But tonight, I would like to talk about the role of the Black church. What is the role of the Black church? Now, if I do what I think I'm going to do, break it up into two parts, I'll be more definitive, like I am most of the times, in the second part. In the first part, what I'll do is establish more of a foundation. And in doing that, we will be up to snuff and can better contribute with respect to what should we be doing now, because it's all of whatever we study, read about, experience, it should all be a stepping stone to our liberation. It should all be a stepping stone to our liberation. I dare say, if it's not about liberation, if it's not about freedom, I'm almost tempted to say, well, what is it? If what you were doing, if the majority of your work does not lead you to liberation, your thought process does not lead you to freedom and improving yourself, making yourself better, making our conditions better as a people, then really I'm asking you, what is your study for? And that's, it's just a reality that we all have to experience. If this does not all lead to liberation, then how bad do you need your religion? How bad do you need your culture? And all those things that are linked to it, if it does not lead you towards liberation, at least a significant step towards. That is obligatory. Now, in asking about the role of the black church, we would be stepping past what is a church and what is the basic foundation and purpose and role of a church, period. So if I was to ask you, and on occasion, I'll let you know in advance, I have a dry throat tonight. So I'm going to be taking my sips and want to reassure everybody, especially the Zoom audience, that this is just green tea. It's not anything with a kick to it. It's just green tea. So while we talk about the church, nobody's going to be hooping and hollering, at least not me. Now, if y'all start hooping and you know, doing whatever, that's on y'all. It's not me, because this is nothing but green tea. So, from the outset, if I was to ask you, what's a church, or what is the purpose of a church? What might be a purpose? What might be, in your opinion, it doesn't matter whether you go to church or don't go to church, even though most of us have probably, at one point in our life, experienced a religious setting, whether that's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, or whether you grew up in a traditional African culture. What would the gathering be like or for? Anybody have an idea? What would the gathering be for?
Worship. Yeah.
You said worship?
Yes.
That's an excellent answer.
I said
One of the things is the worship. Anything else?
Some people go for spirituality.
Some go for spirituality. Okay, so there's a spiritual dimension, and certainly with African people more often than anyone else on the planet, if you're around African people, there's going to be some spirituality. You know, you're not going to find any large amount of people who are, I'd say agnostic or what have you in the black community. You're not going to find a lot. You might find some people in between religions, unsure of religion for whatever the reason might be. But most people either have a religious belief, even that belief is just there's somebody out there bigger than us, but for the most part, it's going to be spirituality. Anybody else?
I was to get closer to your God.
Say that again?
Get closer to God.
Get closer to God. So there is an acknowledgement of a higher being, a creator of sorts, and there at some point is going to be communication, seeking that higher force. Anything else?
Sanctuary.
Sanctuary. That's an excellent one. Who said that? Sanctuary. That's deep.
What does that mean?
What does it mean?
Traditionally, when you stepped inside the church, the law of the sheriff, nobody could touch you. You had sanctuary. You were
Okay.
protected.
That's interesting. Now she took sanctuary out of the definition I was thinking of, and but it's the same premise. Her position with sanctuary was that once you reach a place of safety, no one can touch you. I mean, and I'm sure she means by that the Lord. In other words, even in other countries can enter into a church, there are certain protocols that have to be put in place to do that. Now, the other sanctuary is that the Bible describes sanctuary as a place where you are safe. It's an assured safety, similar to what you said, another type of safety with respect the reach of the Lord. This safety is more along the lines of you are safe from the evil of the world. Whatever bad spirits there are, you at a place of safety where you can communicate with the God himself of the universe. And that during that time, that's a sanctuary for you. And that's deep. That's a good one. Now, all those things you said was right. Nobody had the wrong answer. All those were excellent. Yes?
Our church was a place of political activity.
It's a church of physical activity?
Was a place of political activity.
Political activity.
Organization.
Man, she is so right. The church in the real sense is a political animal. You know, we're going to try to get to some of that, even though we're going to get more into that on part 2. But certainly it's a place where politics are practiced. The church is a place where there are politics that is done outside of the church, and there's politics inside of the church. And we'll see how they mesh and how it's being done for some people and against others. We're going to get to some of that tonight. We're going to get to more of that in part 2, but that's a real good one, the politics, internal and external in the church. And some of that is in direct contention with what the Bible says. I'll cover a little bit of that tonight. I might cover a little bit of that.
Is it a place also for socialization and for enhancement of our own culture and our own self-dignity and self-worth?
It's a social aspect. That's correct. That the church has a key social component to it. Some people, we ever hear people, especially from down south, our people say sometimes, that's all we knew growing up. And it's true. In other words, church 3-4 times a week, you're working, coming home, going to church in the evening service. You have a Bible study, a night of Bible study. You have a young folks night. You have the usher board, you have the deacon board, all these other things that are going on. And on Sundays in most churches, that's the big day where the entire church is present. So that social setting is very important. Now, we have to understand that one of the rules of the church is that we have to, in the church, obviously there's a belief in God and there's a belief in God's love. That God's love is eternal. So it's not like God loved you one day, then he don't love you the next day. So it's incumbent upon those who go to church to preach that doctrine, that God loves you. So when you meet somebody, oftentimes you say something like, you know, brother, God loves you, because their station in life might be so bad. It might be, not always, but their station might be so bad that they don't think much of themselves. And they'll call themselves the N-word, B-word, MF all day. Everything is an F-bomb. Everything is just negative. And if you dig deeper, you find out they don't think much of themselves. Now, this doesn't only apply to the church. There are other religious institutions that their job is to uplift you, to make you feel better about yourself. And that's part of it. What about salvation? Part of the job of a church is to tell you that this is not the only reality. There's something down the road for you. Now, obviously, people can take advantage of that. And you know the whole pie in the sky thing. But there is preaching a word of salvation. And salvation is important, as a matter of fact, to some people that are very spiritual. Salvation is probably more important than the very things you're doing here. Even though you're living here right now, I'm sure many of you have heard that statement about the people that are so spiritual, they almost spooky, where they say, you're so focused on heaven that you're no earthly good. Because so much emphasis is on salvation. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to think about salvation. Obviously, as one goes on in their years, they think in terms of salvation. There's a resting place. There's an ultimate resting place for my spirit. So, and this is not specifically limited to the Black church. I'm just saying these are certain protocols and fundamentals of the church. I'm just trying to, tonight, more than anything, establish a foundation. And I'll talk some about the Black church specifically. And the white church, now that's not a term you hear much, the white church. But there is such a thing as a white church. And I'm going to break a little bit of that down, and then a little bit of the Black church. And then we'll, go down that road a little bit with some things that need to be said. And then we'll do some Q&A. Now, there's also the aspect of praying. What's praying? When a person prays, I think we've all at one time or another seen somebody pray. Now, we've seen somebody pray, we've seen people fast, we've seen people sacrifice. But when you hear that somebody's praying, what exactly are they doing at that moment?
They're supposed to be talking or praying to whoever they think their higher power is.
Okay, and that's correct. When you're praying, you're not just speaking to the cosmos. You're actually speaking to that which is the Creator, God. That's basically what you're doing. It's a form of communication. You're not praying when you're talking to someone you know, family and friends, loved ones. That's communication. You love them, or you might show them love in many ways, but actual prayer is that communication. The prayer might be worship for things that you want to see happen, or it might be for things where you've been blessed and it's already happened. But prayer is traditionally connected with a religious institution. You pray. If you do all the other things and you don't pray, then you're falling short of the mark. So prayer is important. And the other aspect I'd say is evangelism. If you believe in whatever you believe in, you want to explain that to others. So that means that if you believe in the word, whatever that word might be, then you want to give that to others. You want to be able to let others know that the word is a good thing for them and for you. And in that way, you are completing your duty. In the Bible, it says, Jesus himself says, I will build the church. Now, what he meant was he will build his church. But you are supposed to help in the sense that you spread the word. Now, that might come in conflict with certain people that in part two I will delineate more on certain individuals. Very familiar names that did a whole lot of things. But the very things that you mentioned at the beginning, that's why I wanted to bring that out at the beginning, about which church and, things like spirit, sacrifice, praying, all of things. That's not exactly what they were about. They were about other things. Now, worship is a key component. Yes.
What about education and miseducation?
Education
And
is
and
one.
miseducation.
Education and miseducation. Well, education is one of the 5 points. I'm going to go through all the 5 points. Now, she just mentioned one. One is education. Okay, the other one was the first one I mentioned, which is worship. Part of the church is to worship, and that will be celebrating, the love of God. That's worship. Second thing is ministry. You're more or less demonstrating what the word is, and that God is love. And so you're ministering anytime you go to a person or tell anybody about, the goodness or what the Bible describes as good news. You're ministering at that time. Now, evangelism is traveling over. If your mission is to evangelize, which some people do, some people are not sedimentary in the sense that they have one location they go. They believe that you gotta go all over. They have a lot of evangelists now that have worldwide ministries, and believe it or not, it can be done from right here. With the use of Zoom and modern technology, you can actually reach all the corners of the earth with the camera and audio. And so the fourth is fellowship. With all you doing, you have to have fellowship in any type of church. There must be fellowship. And then last but not least is the one that was mentioned, discipleship, which has to do with educating. You have to educate one to another, because if you have knowledge and information, you should be able to share that information. That's important. Now, why did I say all of these things that I said as a preface? Because it's important to know what the church is. Because most people think a church is a building. This could be church. This very gathering can be church, as opposed to the building on the corner made of stone, brick, what have you, and the fact that it has a porta pit, and it has all those things that you associate, choir and all these things, and music that you associate with church. Church is where you are. Now, the purpose is to bring a lot of people together. And I'm going to get to the white church specifically in a minute, but just wanted to establish what a church is. That it brings people together, whether it's different backgrounds, people have different viewpoints, cultures, characteristics, mindsets. But a church at some point wants you to focus on a central person, which will be God, and this is what we're talking about. And in that way, it unites that group, because all of you profess a belief in God. Now, and this would be consistent with whether it was Islam or Judaism, these things. Now, let's get to the white church. And anytime, we'll see if the white church is what we describe. When you're talking about worship, prayer, communication, fellowship, discipleship, is that what we see in the white church? Or is it along the lines of something where it's more political and some other things that we'll cover? In any church structure, just wanted to mention that there are bishops, pastors, reverends, deacons, parishioners. There are all those things that that's part of the church, and that there are different roles that are more or less people find themselves in when they go to church. They find themselves in these roles. Now, we went through centuries of oppression here in America. So, for many of us, the first we saw church here in America was the white church. That's what we saw, the white church. Now, you have to remember that the white church has a long history, just like it goes back to Europe and even further. The white church is so different from the black church. And I'm going to mention some things because the white church, from the outset, the white church, I'll say, first of all, it embraces terrorist groups. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to backtrack. It embraces so many things that are against black people. You don't have to wonder why Bishop Richard Allen left the white church and formed his own church. Richard Allen, a former slave, started his church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the 1700s. He formed the first AME, which we say now. We don't even say the words African Methodist Episcopal. We don't even say that. We say AME. So if you say African, some people are shocked. Oh, African. Yeah, African. And that was in the late 1700s. In Pennsylvania, he was born a slave, purchased his own freedom by the time he was about 20 years old. And as a free man, started a church. Now, that wasn't the first church, even though some say it's around that time that was the first independent black church. As I said to you before, that church is where you are. So that might have been one of the first buildings. But the church was where any two, scripture talk about any two that gather in my name, I shall be in the midst. So consequently, that was one of the first buildings. But there's an older one, and I'm going to give you the name. Reverend George Lady, he founded the first African Baptist church in Savannah, Georgia in 1777. And it was originally called First Colored Church, but it eventually evolved into what most churches in those early years were. It was called the African Baptist.
Was that the first black church in this country?
Yes, it's the first black church. The first black church,
In America?
yeah, it was in Savannah.
Is it still standing? You didn't happen to know? It's still there?
Yeah, it's still there, and it's now it's called the First African Baptist Church, but at the time, in 1777, it was called the First Colored Church initially.
1777?
Yeah. So, we're talking about a situation, where these first two churches, that one as well as Richard Allen's church, those two were the two earliest. And that I'm saying with respect to buildings, because as we know that a church commonly is looked at as a building, but it's actually the individuals. So in common practice, you would say, well, where's your church at? Oh, it's on such and so block, such and such, and such and such. But actually, it's not like whatever religion we practice, whether in slavery or out of slavery, it was still spirituality. Yes,
Jesus was the church. He didn't have a church.
right. And I mentioned that in the scripture it says, I will build a church. That's what Jesus said according to scripture. So everybody else is just helping. So now, as I said, that will be at points that we'll get into in part 2. It'll be in direct conflict with certain bishops, reverends, deacons, and the like, because they dictated what they wanted to do. But the reason why I'm talking about the role right now of the black church is because the hostility of the white church, so it wasn't just white people. These attacks came from the white church. But let's get into that. And we'll know. As I said initially, the white church is white supremacy in its foundation. Now, it might be garbed in patriotism. It might be garbed in white nationalism. But it is extremely supportive of KKK type organizations, White Citizens Council, the very vandals, the very people who would do country justice anytime a black person stepped out of line. These were all sanctioned by the white church. So I'm talking about whether you in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, it didn't matter. They were all well connected. Now, the white church has always connected itself to law enforcement. The white church has always, connected itself to the military. That's why it garbs itself with patriotism. And so there's some serious mutual links. And I'm not just talking about chaplains, I'm talking about the church is historically linked to law enforcement, whether it's sheriffs, police officers, correctional officers, parole, probation, that's paramilitary, or full military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, what have you, Coast Guard. A serious, clear connection.
Except for the Quakers. Except for the Quakers.
Okay, somebody said, except for the Quakers. That's interesting, and since you brought it up, I'll respond to that. The Quakers, time, place, and circumstance. Now, I know why you're saying that, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me. The reason why the sister is saying the Quakers, because it is accurate. There was a place in time where the Quakers, for the most part, took a position against the institution of slavery. I believe, is that what you're talking about? Yeah. That's fair. They did. Out of all the various white groups, whether you was Baptist, whether you was Catholic, Episcopalian, Methodist, and all those other ones, it is accurate that there did come a time where the Quakers took their position. Not every Quaker did. But you are right that the institution made a position so much that there did come a time where you had to say, and it was historically accurate to say, the Quakers are against the institution of slavery. Now that don't mean they love black people. Not at all. But it does mean that from their religious fathers, obviously met, and after a while took a position that no man is supposed to own another man. So the harsh treatment, all those things that were part of it, the rape of children, the rape of women, and in some situations grown men, the beatings, the murders, they weren't with it. So I know why she's saying that about the Quakers. And it's true. There did come a time in our history where they was against slavery. Did they participate in the Underground Railroad? You better believe it. So it was one thing to be against the institution of slavery. It's a whole nother thing to support, be a part of the Underground Railroad, which freed a whole lot of people, to join in an effort of Africans, enslaved Africans. To do that was monumental. So I would not take anything away from the Quakers. The only little point was that I'm just saying it wasn't always that way. And I could tell you that Nixon was a Quaker. But, you know, again, they took a position.
His name on, like, you know, Jewish name on.
Okay, well, I'm just saying that that the Quakers did distinguish themselves from other major white groups. That is true, and there's no denying that. But I would say that wasn't always the position. But that time did come where they took that position and certainly participated in the Underground Railroad. And they did that at risk to their own safety and security. So it's nothing but kudos to me for that. So that's historically accurate to say. Certainly if it raises the question, we'll just have to deal with it because that did happen. Now, for the most part, Ray, you know that sounds. Come on. But for the most part, there is a strong relationship, not just a mild connection. They're inextricably connected to white supremacy at its finest. The white church. And this is evidence after evidence. I remember once Dr. J, just to come up to the date for a moment. Do y'all remember? I think it was Dr. J because I remember Dr. Collins being on Donahue. I remember Jesse being on Donahue. Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson. I remember Minister Farrakhan being on Donahue. But I'm almost certain that it was Dr. Jeffries when he was on Donahue. Now, Dr. Jeffries don't go anywhere without a minimum of about 20 books. He brings his artillery with him. And was alluding to so many books and delineated that the Christ figure in the Bible, I'm almost certain Dr. J said that person was black. And a white person in the audience said that Jesus isn't black, but if he's in fact black, she's no longer a Christian. Now, when she said that, I was not surprised at all, because she was just reflecting what most of the other white people failed to say in the audience. And Donahue has a big audience, and she said that because Dr. J was ripping, and the information was just so replete that they could not argue. Dr. J, master teacher, couldn't argue with him. So they said, basically, what she said was reflective of the whole order. She said she'll give up her Christianity in a minute if she finds out that Christianity is an African religion, because that's what he laid out. That the basic concepts that created Christianity are from Africa. And when he finished with her, she said she's more than willing to give up her Christianity. That's how bad Dr. J is, master teacher, and come from a long line, that I mentioned earlier today, which was more or less what Ray does every week when he mentions a whole host of master teachers that he just puts them all together, calling them historians. They are historians, but they're master teachers. And they can teach you on so many different levels and penetrate and prick your consciousness to where there's no denials. And that's what Dr. J did that day. And this is why she made it clear that if it's true what he's saying about Africa being, Christianity being based on African tradition, then she admitted that she's no longer a Christian. She won't have a problem walking away from it because her white nationalism will prevent her from observing an African religion. Now, the white church does quite a few things in operation, in its daily operations. Now, if you understand this relationship with the armed forces, if you understand this relationship with paramilitary groups, then it's not hard to understand other things that are connected with the religion. What about its stand with respect to the black church? Now, as I said, in the early days, most blacks who were free at that time, or let's just say post-slavery, they might have started out in a white church, but they didn't receive the greatest wealth. And they didn't like being up there in the balcony on the back. If they had a balcony, they was up in the balcony. If they had a back, then they was way in the back. And at some point would form their own. Like I said, the first two black churches was formed that way. And then obviously they followed suit. And there was black churches all over the place, because wherever we at, you're not going to see a large community of atheists that are of African descent anywhere. Because it's what you mentioned earlier, spirituality. There's going to be some spirituality, so we find ourselves a part of a belief system for the most part. You know, sometimes you hear a scholar like Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, and she'll mention the African Holy Ghost. And you say, wow, a PhD with a belief system, yeah. She said it makes her a better Christian, all that history she knows. And Dr. J is rubber stamped that and said it does make you a better Christian when you know what you are preaching and you know what you're studying and reading. So the black church did separate, obviously, from the white church. The black community, though always close in proximity, is in a separate place, even though if we're all in Brooklyn or Harlem or what have you. So there were certain things that would happen. What am I talking about? The politics of a white church will always keep you in your place. It's set up that way. White nationalism is nothing to play with. You're just seeing right now some white nationalism on steroids, and you really think you're seeing something new. I will challenge you tonight and tell you there is nothing new that you see going on now. The white church is no joke. Now, we've all seen pictures of a black person being hung and a group of white people encircled that person. And some of them had on pretty good clothes. They just came from church. And right from the church to a hanging. Now, if your belief system told you to worship, pray without cease, prophesize in God's name, suffer sacrifice, where does it say that you're supposed to be a part of a public hanging? How do you mistreat? If I wanted to get ahead of myself, I would say all these things where the plumbing is inferior in black communities. It's outdated. So whether we talk about Flint, whether we talk about Newark, and the most recent one,
Mississippi.
in Manhattan, what is it? On the east side, lower east
Jacob
side.
houses. Jacob Reese houses.
Jacob Reese houses. All those things, whether it was in parts of Detroit, Newark went through it. All these things, if you can call it environmental racism, but these things are calculated. And so, when you see all of these things in the military doing certain things, you say to yourself, the role of the black church has to be different. to pray and to fast and to think about the goodness of the Lord, that's fine. And that's good and that's obligatory. You have to do those things as a believer, a true believer. But at the same time, what do you do if the pressure is mounting in a host of ways? And now, when I get to part 2, I'm going to mention certain individuals and what they did, but more or less in this foundation, I would ask you, what would dictate a different role from just praying and fasting and thinking about one's own personal salvation? You got to do something different. And there's 1,001 organizations, most of whom came out of the church. Now, I would ask you, the black church, what would it do post-slavery with ballot access? Does the church have a strategy with respect to ballot access? Or is the church just going to leave that to you to figure it out? Ballot.
B-A-L-O-T, voting.
Vote.
Ballot.
Ballot.
B-A-L-O-T.
Access to the,
The
right
vote.
to vote.
That's where all the organizations in the church.
What's
All
that?
the organizations in the church. All the meetings were called to the church. That was the only place everything could go.
That's correct. And I hope everybody heard what you said. Since with the black church, now you gotta remember, white folks, when you go down south, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, yeah, during the week, like I said before about us, all during the week, the centrality of the church is incredible. So, white folks, they, some of them during the week, they went to church. But Friday night is what?
What?
What? What's Friday night, white folks down south? What's that?
I said finger popping party, having a mighty good time.
Oh, I'm not saying that white folks don't party, because certainly they do. But Friday night is high school football down south. Friday night is high school football. Saturday night is what? Oh, Saturday. All day Saturday. It's college football. Sunday is church. Even white folks, they go to church. And then after they go to church, they're going to watch Sunday football. So that's almost a second religion down there, sports. But Friday night, they're supporting their local high school teams. They gather. And Saturday is the college. So if you're in South Carolina, Clemson, you around Atlanta, University of Georgia, will have the Bulldogs, and of course now, do I even have to mention if you're in Alabama? Roll Tide, right? Roll Tide, the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Who's the famous coach from Alabama? Yeah. Anybody remember? Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant, the Bear. As influential almost as the governor. Right? He's on par with a George Wallace. That's how important and influential football is in the South. Now I know here, if you're in New York City, you don't think of any high school football all that important. Or college. There's no college you could point to in New York City that has that tradition.
Most of them gave up the football team.
Yeah, but they all happen, believe it or not. So, and I guess the closest thing to football would be Penn State years ago. It's not as prominent now, but I'd say Penn State at one point, and that's not too far from here. But down south is very important. So, church and sports but more importantly, the wrapping of itself in that flag of patriotism. That's white nationalism, and you're going to see how dangerous that is. So I said battle access. Right to free speech. This is black folks now, the black church. Does the black church play a role in the rights of free speech? It should, because if you don't have the right to free speech, you're in trouble with what you say in the church. So you better establish that you can speak freely. Now the black church, to this very day, more so than any other institution, more so than any organization, is independent. It is more independent than any black organization you can name. It is to this very day. And that's because it can pay its own bills for the most part. Most black churches can pay its own bills. Most black churches do not need the urging of white people to function. It already has established itself as a church. It already has worshipers. White folks don't have to come to me. Primarily, you have a black audience in a black church every day. I think Dr. King once said in the 60s, he said the most segregated hour in America is 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., something like that. He said it's the most segregated time in America because you got the white church here and you got the black church here. And it's literally almost all black here. And it's literally almost all white here. So he was right with that. Now, if you have battle access and you have the right to free speech, which the black church, I'm going to show you clear things in that in part 2 of how free speech was major. What about something else? What about the Constitution? Should the black church be concerned about the Constitution? What is the Constitution anyway? We don't need a scholarly answer. What's the Constitution? Quite simply put, it's the law of the land.
It's a political document that regulates the law.
It's a political document, that regulates the law. The nature of it is extremely coercive, is that correct? It's coercive. It has authority.
Yes.
It has force behind it, don't it?
Yes.
Because it is not just a document. Because if it was a document, you can fold up that document and go on about your business. But you can't. There are people that will defend that document to their death and to the detriment of you if you violate that document. So it is force, it's power, it's authority, it's coercive. It will bend you to its will one way or the other. So the black church should be very concerned about how the Constitution will be interpreted. Why do I say that? Does anybody here know what an original intent is? Anybody have an idea of original intent? The real what?
Reason something is done,
The real reason something was done.
It was designed to create a more perfect union of the combination of the states and respect the rights of people.
Okay.
Supposedly, theoretically, but it was more so for whites and what they thought, in my opinion, for this.
Well, landowners, People who had property.
Well, people
All-
with property tend to be rich white men, in most cases, not all.
Okay, all those are decent answers, but Dietrich, was you gonna say something? Okay. Original intent primarily means the will of the founders,
The
the
government.
founding fathers. So we're talking about Sam Adams, and
Rich-
George Washington.
Rich white men.
No, not just rich white men. I'm talking about that group of 20-some odd people that really formed this concept later to be known as, the United States of America. And these were the people that in Philadelphia put together the Constitution. That's why I asked you about the Constitution before I even mentioned it.
To maintain control,
Say that again?
to maintain control.
This was to establish something that might have never been put together before, but this will be a lasting document because they all agreed that there wasn't going to be a king, but there was going to be order. And there was going to be a rule of law, which our doctor mentioned. There's going to be a rule of law. But it was not going to be a king because with the king you don't have law. It's whatever the king decides that day. If he decides that what you did is 5 lashes, you get 5 lashes. But if he wakes up tomorrow and somebody else do the same thing and he says off with his head, what happens? Off with his head. So they needed consistent law, and in saying that, did the original founders, Adams and Jefferson and all these guys, did they imagine black folks flying on planes, pulling out credit cards, buying this, going down to Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, and doing contracts? Did they imagine?
Speaking French, they were outraged. The black people speak French.
Well, I can't say that. I can't say that part, and the only reason why I'm saying that, there's nothing significant to the French language because whoever the colonizer was, they taught you their language. So it's not an accident that in certain parts of the world, black people speak French.
But Americans, white Americans were outraged by it.
You will then.
We ain't got no
Well, look,
sense. We ain't got
there's
no
some
sense.
people that are amazed that if you go into another room and find another room in a house, it's new to you. Columbus, well, those who came after Columbus claim that he discovered this.
He was never here.
Well, he got the Hispaniola, but that meant nothing when you think of the minimum was 15 to 20 million Native Americans were here already. So for them to say Columbus discovered this is to dismiss all those that are currently here, human beings. So I'm just saying that to say that language is something that's imposed on another group, the colonizer and those that are colonized. So you got people in Africa that speak French, Cote d'Ivoire, other places, and the same way in Central and South America they speak Spanish. That's not their indigenous language. So, and certainly English that we all speak, or English that is spoken in the Caribbean, you basically identifying the colonizer based on the way you speak. That's simply put. So I would just say that the Constitution is important. What about owning property? Wouldn't that be something of concern to the church, owning property? And by that, I don't mean just owning the church. They want to own property. You want to engage in contracts. You want to, since you're free, and I'm talking post-slavery now, you want to be able to engage in contracts. You want definitive parent-child relationships, where before, during slavery, there was no such thing as a parent-child relationship among black people. No such thing. You says no, there were mothers and children and all that. Yeah, the nursing stage and all that, nursing a child and all that stuff. But that mother could be sold tomorrow. That child could be sold tomorrow. So there was no understanding of real parent-child relationships and control. With anything that mother birthed, the slave master owned. She didn't own that child. So all these things have to be established and understood. So what about black codes? Shouldn't the church want to, now I'm saying, while all this praying and fasting and all this is going on, shouldn't the church be concerned about black codes?
Of course.
And so we started out just saying the church is supposed to be where you fellowship, where you worship, where you pray, how you evangelize and spread the word of the love of God, the love of Jesus, and with respect to the church. These things, but I'm mentioning things that are all on the outside. As I said, access to the ballot, rights to free speech, the Constitution, owning property. That has to be negotiated. So you're dealing with the people who owned it before you, that they were white. Now you have to be able to sit across the table from a white person and own something. And whether you can read or write, somebody in the room would have to help you, of course, because you'd be taken to the bank each and every time if you don't have somebody there helping you, and more often than not, the pastor could read or write. Because he could read the Bible, and he knew enough how to not only tell you what to sign, he could read the numbers of the house that you're probably buying, what have you, and your children probably could read better than you, more than likely, because they were receiving an education while you were out there in the field working. So they would be very helpful in negotiating for you, even though you're the breadwinner. But that's a part of the process. What about convict leasing that came up primarily after slavery was abolished, after the 13th Amendment? After the 13th Amendment was over, you had a thing called convict leasing. Does anybody know what that is? Convict leasing.
Convict leasing.
Convict leasing.
Yeah.
I hope I'm saying it clearly.
Yeah.
Convict leasing.
Using prisoners to do private work and not paying them.
So the person got paid.
Not the prisoners.
Okay.
It's a book that form of enslavement.
Yes.
It was a reintroduction to slavery because
Color coded up.
it's one thing to have somebody do private work. In a sense, that's almost a bargain. If that'll get you out of the prison for that day, and they take you to somewhere, now that place might work you from sun up to sundown. But if they're working you and feeding you and giving you water, and if the labor's not too hard, then that's time better spent than probably being in jail where they whipping you and making you break rocks or what have you. And I think you mentioned the chain gang. Well, there's a reason why Sam Cooke sang that song. Now, didn't he sing that song beautifully?
Yes.
but it was horrible. He sang it at a time where black folks didn't make many political songs. He said in the song, but I'm working so hard, but I want to go see my woman. And he sang that song so well. He sang it so good, you almost forgot about what the song was about. The chain gang. Working so hard all day. He sang that song beautifully. I wish one of y'all could sing it, because y'all don't want me to sing it.
That's the sound of the man working on the chain gang.
Sound.
That's the sound
Well,
of a man working on the chick.
But common leasing was very important, and we'll see in the next one how the church and black folks and black leaders, the civil rights organizations dealt with that. But I'm raising these things because you cannot, in the encirclement of all this oppression, you cannot just do what the white church taught you to do. Just pray, fast, worship, evangelize. You can't just do those things. You can't just focus in on your personal salvation. You can't do it. And history was made by those who stepped out of that. That was the history. Those that were able to step out of that and understand that there was a bigger purpose. I dare say a higher purpose. A more important call. And I'm saying that the God himself, to those who believe in God, there was a higher calling from God himself to do something outside of what traditionally you do in church. Praying and fasting, singing and dancing, and those things, they were a higher calling.
Brother, are you getting to sharecropping?
Yeah, sharecropping was very important. Does everybody know what sharecropping was? Because what's sharecropping?
It's another form of abuse, black folks went through, another form of enslavement. You're labeled and the master wins, and yet you're according to his dictates.
It's renting the land, renting out the land to you, and you work the land all year, and you don't make a profit.
But you don't get,
Yes.
the benefits after all your labor half the time.
Benefits. Okay, well here's what. Everybody said a little part. The sharecropping was a process that was set up by who? Your former slave master. It was set up by your former slave master.
By master.
Now, I hate saying master, but former slave master. He set up a system. Do we agree that he couldn't lose?
Of course.
He can't lose. Now, you're going to work hard all day, and you're going to do that entire work season. And then, when it's time to pull in all those crops, you're going to pull in the lima beans, the okra, watermelons, potatoes, yams, everything under the sun. And when you bring all of that in, guess what? You're gonna have a few dollars in your pocket, but you're gonna be short. When all is said and done, because he's gonna charge you for the seeds. Overcharge you, truth be told. You were overcharged. You were overcharged for the coveralls that you wore, that you got from his trading store. You got any equipment that you might have used, the hoe or whatever else you use to do the farming.
The oxen.
Yes, and let's say you bought an oxen. You're gonna pay a different price than what a white person pays for their eyes.
And weren't you sleeping in his property, his house, for the time that you were there, was it his
No,
property?
he might have, you might have your own independent space for you and your family. Because it's only a substitute or another form of slavery, as we mentioned. So you're gonna have control of that land, but you're working for him. And he just sitting back, waiting for that money to roll in. So whatever you're growing, whatever the harvest is, you're always gonna be short. And guess what? The most people, they take his word when he puts the cotton on the scale, when he puts the tobacco on the scale, it's always going to be done where it's leaning towards him, not you. Always. And this didn't go on for 1 year or 10 years or 20 years. It went on during the whole shared property experiment. It took their children, their great-grandchildren, to better run things if they didn't have a job in the business world or education. They were able to better do the accounting, and things were done better then. They knew what the market price on things was, where that person worked all those years. And you said, what scale? They don't know what scale is. If you say, well, what is this going for in the next time over? Or if you took this to someone else, they wouldn't have an idea or a clue, because everything had to go to him, your former slave owner. So that's a whole other system.
What
Share
about the
price.
company store?
I'm just saying that company store, if you just bought cover roll.
So I'm saying, that's what kept us in slavery.
Yeah. And
We
then
never
it just,
paid, because they always
Absolutely.
cheated us, and then we always had a bill, and then you were tied to the land.
Yeah.
So the next, you had to go into debt for the season for the next crop.
and this is why, this is part of the cause of the Great Migration. Because if you see your grandfather go through what he went through, and you see your father and your uncles all going through that, do you know what you say?
No, thank
That's
Not
not for
me.
me. You will eventually say, that's not for me. So you get a Dr. Clark out of the Alabama, South Carolina area, and so many others that migrated. Right after they went to the service or what have you, they ended up in Philadelphia and New York and New Jersey because they wasn't going back. Now, obviously, some dynamic teachers that they had taught them in elementary school, junior high school, and high school, so they had fantastic teachers. And they received good education, thorough, very, very thorough. But they knew that that lifestyle down there wasn't for them. And so migrations occurred. Are we taking a break, Ray, or are we just going straight through? That's the age now. Okay, so, okay. What about something as innocent on its appearance as Confederate monuments and Confederate flags? Should the church have a position? Should it make you aware of what the encirclement is? Confederate monuments and images, whether it's in the form of a flag or a statue in the blackest part of the town, in the park that all your children play in, and you looking up at a magnificent statue a mile high of a white supremacist.
Like racist.
Should the black church have a position on it?
Yeah.
So again, it's taking us out of the comfort zone of merely fronting. you out of that, and there's something else you have to do. As I said, in part 2 is when we're gonna really get into those who stepped out and those that did some other things with their power as a pastor, as a bishop, what have you. Now, this was during the time of, as I said, just post-slavery. There are a host of other things that I can mention, but before we get into the Q&A, I want to mention a few things. I want to mention a white pastor in particular that I think everybody here might have heard of at one time or another. Anybody ever heard of Pat Robinson?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
He speaks to God.
Now, he was
Liberty
one.
University.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if that's it, but you know, that's how popular he was. And he used to have the 700 Club. If you remember, that was a TV
It's
show.
still on.
Yes.
It's still on.
Okay.
There's a station for religious people with money.
Well, yeah, but at that time, it was the religious show on television going back 40, 50 years ago. The 700 Club. Now, Pat Robinson, this is just to show you the difference in the black church and the white church. This is something that he wrote just several years ago while President Obama was in office. Now, these are his words. These are not my words. I just wrote it down. This is Pat Robinson on President Obama. This is his prayer. May your rule be short. May your wife become husbandless. May your children become fatherless. I'm going to repeat that again. I'm going to repeat that again because I know you didn't get it. So I'm going to repeat it again.
They said that was the white church prayer.
This was the prayer. I'm not going to say the white church, but this is what he says to the white church, and all those who follow. But this is Pat Robinson, one of the biggest televangelists of all time, on President Obama. May your rule be short. He was talking about him as president. May your rule be short. May your wife become husbandless. May your children become fatherless.
Who said that?
Pat Robinson. This is Pat Robinson.
That's a godly thing to
A
say.
man who's supposed to be a prayer, of sacrifice,
Supposed to be a man of God, right?
worshiping God.
When he spoke to God, he said that he was talking to the big man.
Wow.
No, seriously.
Wow.
He was.
That's what he said.
So, this is what he said about Obama. Now, he said a whole lot of other things. He talked about the beauty of Donald Trump's wife when she came in, and we talked about how beautiful she was, but was blazing, saying cruel things about Michelle Obama because she wore a lot of dresses that were sleeveless. So he criticized her. But what happened when he saw a nude picture? Somebody showed him a nude picture of Ivana Trump.
Melania.
What did he say? He said, well, that just demonstrates the beauty of a white female. That's what he said. So he criticized Michelle Obama for being sleeveless, but did not criticize Donald Trump's wife for being clothless, naked,
Praise her.
or as we used to say, naked. Naked. And he was not critical of it. So that's a white pastor.
It's on YouTube right now.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. She said it's on YouTube. Wow, interesting. Now, Benjamin Tillman. Benjamin Ryan Tillman. Now, this was a Democrat who he was a governor and a U.S. senator. He lived from 1847. He died in 1918. But he said quite a few things that I have to bring to your attention. He said, "We of the South have never recognized the rights of the Negro to govern white men, and we never will. We have never believed him to be the equal of the white man, and we will not submit to gratifying his lust for our wives and daughters without lynching him. I would to God that none of them was here, but they should be in Africa, and that none of them had ever brought themselves to our shore." Now, we didn't bring ourselves to these shores.
Right.
But he's so sick and so much of a racist that his point was, and this is him as a U.S. senator, he's saying this in Congress. He's basically saying that the white man will never acknowledge the leadership of any black person they are not our leader.
Isn't that the same words they used to take over Wilmington, Delaware, and declare white emancipation?
Well, these are the words they use all over the world.
No, when they took over, they put every black person out of office and said,
No.
"You're declaring white emancipation."
You're talking about Wilmington.
Wilmington,
Yeah, but not Delaware.
yeah.
Wilmington, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
You threw me off when you said Delaware.
No,
That
that's
happened.
someone who's from there.
Yeah. That happened. What she's talking about is the Wilmington Massacre. And that this was the Wilmington Massacre happened after certain newspapers was fed up. Well, what really happened? Okay, we'll talk about what really happened that caused the massacre. There were blacks who had gone to places like Morehouse, other black schools, Atlantic University, and Tuskegee, and all of these places. And
Do you want to do a break, or you want to go straight to?
we'll do a quick break. Right after I wrap this up, we'll do a quick break and then go right back. In the Wilmington Massacre, there were black people that had done well enough that they were able to send their children to school. Their children went away to school and came back with degrees, and some with advanced degrees. They were professors, they were lawyers, they were bankers. They were doing really well. And unfortunately, some of them got nice carriages in their day. And were able to take those carriages, horse and buggy, go across town, and guess who they started dating? Miss Ann. White women. Becky. So,
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
No. Miss Ann started dating them because they were successful.
yeah, but
However,
the
you
black
got
man is always going to be blamed. You know, but we have been taught that that's the forbidden fruit, and we should admire it but never touch it. So in any event, after that happened a few times, 2 or 3 major newspapers in Wilmington started doing articles. And then in the articles, they didn't say they were dating. They said black men was raping them. And that when are the white people going to do something about it? Well, white people did do something about it. They in turn took all of the black people after the election, which was a few sheriffs, quite a few good elected positions, they turn around and massacre well over 3,000 at any one particular time, hit the streets, armed to the teeth, shooting every black person in sight, snatching black folks out of their offices, and black elected officials, duly elected, was physically removed. I'm not talking about threats, I'm talking about physically removed. And in doing that, sheriffs and the like were snatched out. And so the whole law enforcement, the whole political spectrum was systematically changed overnight. All of the black businesses, and they were prominent. You had all sorts of everything from funeral parlors, churches, and every kind of business, boot makers, and all of these, trade guilds and what have you. They were all demolished. They were going into houses, kicking down doors, going into black folks' houses, snatching them out, killing them, taking their silverware, even taking, pianos and things that black folks had. It was an all-out massacre.
Sound like Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Except they declared emancipation.
It was almost as worse.
Yeah.
Almost. Tulsa was a little worse, but we only talking degrees. The only reason why I'm saying that Tulsa was worse is that Tulsa, it was harder to escape. Wilmington was a little easy to escape. In Tulsa, you had forests and you had, what's the area that you call it with crocodiles and all that? Swamps. So you had a lot of areas that you taking your life into more or less like what happened in Rosewood, Florida, where you got the encirclement of swamps and different things, so it's harder to get out.
Trump wasn't there during the swamps.
So it was hard. So it was one of those massacres, and this went on for a few days before the governor turned around and brought in the National Guard and brought in the peace. But the people that left Wilmington, this is what she's talking about, not Wilmington, Delaware, Wilmington, North Carolina, never returned. And those that escaped were lucky, and yes, there were a few black people who lived or had to stay for days in the house of white people. They're servants. People that worked for them and cleaned for them. They couldn't get out, so they had to actually stay with white people, so they survived. But they went back home to nothing. There was no home there anymore. A lot of them were burned out, and there was no reclaiming that which was lost.
No insurance, huh?
No, and even in cases where there was insurance, it was denied.
They're working on that now.
Okay, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that then it must be their grandchildren that they're not alive. If that happened
Just like the brother that got the piece of
over
land.
120 years ago, and they're not alive now. So if that happened in 1898, something like that, they're not alive.
No,
So
it's the descendants, they're fighting. in
yeah,
court
so their
right now.
descendants might be.
They're fighting in court right now.
Yeah, they're fighting in court. So that's so I guess I'll stop there because that's what she was talking about. That massacre did occur, and I'm just saying that I'm raising the question that with all these things that transpired, how will you get a form of justice without being really organized with the church actually became the organizing agent. And I'll stop there, but so when you're talking about Benjamin Tillman, he was just one of many when he said that. As a matter of fact, he was the one that raised the biggest fuss when Booker T. Washington went into the executive mansion with Theodore Roosevelt, if you remember. When he went there, they put out later that he spent the night. He didn't spend the night. He had dinner with the President of the United States. Now, that's a big difference in spending the night. A whole lot of brothers want to spend the night with, certain women, but, they might get dinner and they tell them, you gotta go, and you gotta go. So, that's what happened with Booker T. Washington. So he didn't spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom or nothing like that. But white folks were so incensed that, well, let me just say what Benjamin Tillman, what he said. Benjamin Tillman said, the action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that nigga, those are his words, not mine. He said, the action of President Roosevelt in entertaining that nigga, Booker T. Washington, will necessitate our killing 1,000 niggas in the South so that they will learn their place in it. This was said by a U.S. Senator. He said that in the halls of Congress. Now, just not to be outdone, Bilbo, as he was called in the South, Theodore Gilmore Bilbo, the governor, and he was also a U.S. Senator at another time, he bragged about using the word nigger 77 times in a congressional speech. He bragged. So he wanted, so they were all trying to outdo and upstage each other. So if one person said nigger 10 times, he got out there and said it 77 times. And I think that's still a record to this day that I know of. Now, maybe somebody went in there and practiced without no one around and said it 80 times, but he's recorded, he has the record, he has a Guinness Book of Records for saying nigga 77 times.
Before you go, I think that they followed in the footsteps of Chief Justice Roger Taney.
Absolutely.
1857 with the Dred Scott decision,
Yeah.
where he said that the black man has no rights that a white man is supposed to respect. Now,
That's
that colored the whole shenanigan, because from them, Tillman was born like just a couple of years before that. So that's the philosophy with the Jim Crow and all this stuff that our people have had to endure.
That's correct. Now,
Yes, God.
you have to remember that to this day, Chief Justice Taney is one of the most respected Chief Justices of all time. He is respected in the law circles to this day. Now, what the doctor just mentioned, that is called a dictum. Does anybody know what a dictum is?
It's a law.
It's not a law, it's a pronouncement. A dictum is a pronouncement that is called a dictum because it's a pronouncement that is unnecessary, but it's embedded in a law. It's unnecessary, but it's embedded in a law. In other words, if you had just made sure that a black person has no social rights and you subtract that post-slavery, or in this particular case, this was during slavery, that 1857 decision, he wanted to make sure that the most uneducated white person on the planet, no matter how dumb they might be, will understand that. So he made it that you cannot err by mistake. When he said that basically a black person has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. And so that means that if you dig ditches, if you have the worst job one can imagine, you are better than a law professor, than a doctor, than a judge, a black judge, no matter what, in his respect it to this day because that decision was important. And the only other Chief Justice that I could think of that's on that level would be Bradley. But I'll explain that if you remind me later. If you remind me later and say, who's Chief Justice Bradley, I will tell you. But at this point now, I'll stop to give everybody a 5-minute break if you want additional refreshments or if you want to grab something. We will take 5 minutes and 5-10 minutes, and then we'll get right back.
Okay, everybody get up.
Excellent. He ties everything
We're gonna
together.
have a little 5-minute break. Then we're gonna come back, Zoom audience. You can unmute yourself and have some conversation. You can have a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna come back with a question and answer. Okay. All right.
Okay, so we're back. Good to know that that it's been confirmed that was Brother Brian from the Mighty Cemotep organization, as well as Sister Keisha from Thorough Black Tour. Good to know that we got strong soldiers like that in the Zoom audience. So, as far as I'm concerned, you're here. Just to know that y'all are there, that's a good thing. So good to hear from y'all. And if I didn't mention it before, we have Dr. Munderson is here tonight with us tonight. So it's good to have him. It's good to have some of the First World crew here at Mackey's tonight, and that means a whole lot. And if I say First World and you say First World what, I'm going to really say you really missed it, because they were something else. They were something else, and those that are still around have to continue that legacy, because that didn't come from the suites, it came from the streets, and these were people that gave back, at sacrifice to their career, gave so much back to our people, or we wouldn't be here. You would not be wearing dashikis the way you wear them. You would not be wearing African attire the same way. You would not be walking around with arms if it wasn't for Dr. Ben. And I'm not saying that none of you would, because there would be some. But if it wasn't for people like Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, you would not see as many arms. You would not see a t-shirt saying something like "Free Your African Mind" if it wasn't for First World.
There would be no Black Panther.
Well, the Black Panther Party was
That was a
around.
movie.
Okay, but I'm just saying the Black Panther,
forever.
the Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Okay, I hear that. I like that too, because I believe that Black folks left to their own devices can create a Wakanda. And I'm not even suggesting on that scientific level where trains that need tracks and all the various things, and how they can make clothing that was like a force field. It doesn't even have to be like that, but I know we can develop a sense of love and loyalty to each other where you ain't got to worry about a little baby running down the block, because it doesn't matter how far that child runs, he's protected. And this is the way, even in the traditional South, if you seen so-and-so's baby, you say, oh, that's so-and-so's baby. And somebody from the North might say, oh, well, go grab him. And they say, grab him for what? He's with us, everybody, this whole block. You ain't got to worry about that 2-year-old wandering anywhere. Everybody knows whose baby that is.
He's where he's supposed to be.
Right. And so it's a whole different outlook, and believe me, we can return to that. So I do believe in Wakanda forever. I just can't wait till it gets there. And when it do, it'll be people who made the greatest of sacrifices to bring that into existence. Because if you left it up to the tenants of white supremacy, we will destroy, exploit, hate, disrespect ourselves, and black men running out here disrespecting black women, women out here disrespecting black men. The family structure in certain situations have been devastating, and we can do better with that, and I believe we will. And as I said, the whole thing with a cultural expression of love comes from things like the First World. It comes from the United African Movement. It comes from organizations that went that little extra step. You know, United African Movement used to send children up every year to a sleepaway black camp that was African-centered. And they received the gift of brotherhood and sisterhood and knowledge that they wouldn't have gotten. Certainly, Sister Keisha used to teach up here. You know, she was one of the teachers, Harold, James, and so many others in the United African Movement. And certainly, Sister Leola Maddox was the leader of that group, and Alton Maddox himself when he would come up. So it was, and Dr. Kaba, and I have to say his name because he was up there every year, Dr. Kaba. Hiawatha Kaba, some might know him as Booker T. Cole, but Dr. Kaba was there every year, and anytime Sister Leola asked him to come and lecture, he would come to the United African Movement. So we had so many heroes and sheroes that have done so much. So, you know, with that, to the reference of the Black Panther movie, Wakanda Forever, you know, I'm with that, and I know that can happen. So, okay, Deidre. Yeah, okay. So in any event, and good to hear, sister, that you back in the day, you know, back with Dr. Matthew and Dr. Ben, and certainly on the way you raise certain questions, it shows your connection with him. And what was that I said, if you reminded me, I would mention? Bradley, okay. The reason why, when Dr. Munderson mentioned that Chief Justice Cheney, I said the other one of note that's so recognized is Chief Justice Bradley. Now, most of us that do know about Chief Justice Cheney, not because of the laws he implemented and the way he swayed the Supreme Court, but that dictum that he mentioned about two white people, basically telling them that black people have no rights that they are bound to respect. So your property is not your property as far as a white person thinking goes. Your wife is not your wife. Your children is not your children, because they don't have to respect child-parent relationships. Your property, no. They do what they want to do. And that's the reality then, and in some cases now. So Bradley's contribution to white supremacy was, and you probably just don't know the name, but some of you might be familiar with the situation. Now, you know the Tilden Hayes run for president in 1876. So after Lincoln, of course, you know, there was Johnson, and after, you know, Lincoln assassinated, you had Johnson, and then you had Grant, served 2 terms as president. Ergo, the new battle was between Tilden and Hayes for who was going to be president. Well, the vote was so close and so evenly divided that America was experiencing its first constitutional crisis. Now think about that. Now, over 100, close to 100 years earlier, the concept of America was laid down. But now you have a situation where America is looking at a constitutional crisis. What do you do? The vote was so close that it was basically a north-south battle. Now they had just got over the Civil War. They did not want a continuation of the Civil War. So what did it come down to? It came down to a 15-man roster. 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and Bradley, Chief Justice William Bradley. So there was a closet agreement that the South position was, and even though this is not officially documented, it is documented. The South told the North, basically, you can have Hayes. In other words, Sammy Tilden don't have to be president. You can have Hayes. But every federal troop that's in the South gotta go. Said, you all gotta go. We got a plan for the South once you pull those federal troops out. And the North wanted Hayes. So they said, all right. So Bradley was the deciding vote. And so this agreement happened. Hayes became president after Grant. And in so doing, his first order of business was what? Take out the troops. And he did it. He took the troops out, and the violence that happened after that was worse than anything you saw during slavery. It was so widespread that they beat the black man and woman into submission. Ergo, a whole nother era of slavery. Even though there was a 13th Amendment in place, and even a 14th in place, making you a citizen. Even the 15th, giving the black man the right to vote. The black woman couldn't vote. But at that time, 1870, the black man had the right to vote. Nothing to vote for, but you had the right to vote. You had access to the ballot. If you could walk by those 2 guys with a rifle that stood right there at the door, you go ahead and vote.
You can vote.
If you think you're bad enough, try it.
Yeah, come on, vote, Dad.
Try it. So, William Bradley, Justice Lamont, as Chief Justice Taney, they knew what they were doing. So the federal troops was pulled out. Ergo, the whole era of Jim Crow came into existence. The black codes and the level of violence and certainly the way the Klan came back with a vengeance, it was unprecedented. And then, like we mentioned, you had things that happened in Wilmington, and you had certainly Black Wall Street, Tulsa, and you had the same thing in Rosewood, Florida, and so many other places, the massacres that occurred. And the question was, as I posed in the beginning, what's the role? What were we developing the people that we needed to develop in that encirclement of terror in the black church? And at this point, I'm gonna stop for a while. It's after 9:30. So we'll do Q&A. We'll do Q&A, and Ray, you can decide, between here and the Zoom.
Okay, the first question is
Before you answer, this period you're talking about is called Reconstruction.
The radical Reconstruction.
where blacks had power.
Yes.
And we're talking about maybe 5-6 million registered black voters who had that franchise stripped down to about maybe 20,000 from 5 million. So
Well,
by removing
go ahead.
removing the federal troops, they had no protection. And then these guys started run rampant, and we get into the period you're talking about.
Started wilding out, they still wilding out.
Dr. Munderson is pointing out that this period was called the Reconstruction period. It lasted at best 10, 12 years max.
Yeah.
And after that, by 1877, once Hayes came in, his wink promise was to let the South gain its own sovereignty back. So the South was once sovereign again. It lost the war, but it was now sovereign again, left to its own devices. The mistreatment of ourselves was unprecedented, and in time caused some of the great migrations from the deep South, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, some went west to LA, others went to, for the most part, Chicago, Detroit, and places like that. That's why sometimes if you go to Chicago and Detroit and you talk to people there, you say, wow, why you sound like you from Georgia and Mississippi? Well, that's where they were from.
Cleveland.
And that's where that whole Midwest. And then other people from the Carolinas, South Carolina, North Carolina, places like that, they came to Philly. They came to New Jersey. They came to New York and places like that because that oppression was just to a point where if they went to the service, when they came back from the service, they said, I'm out of here. You know, Dad, Granddad, I can't do this. So I'm out. And they came to the North. Now they found oppression still, but just not quite that type and not quite that bad. And so that's what caused it. And as the professor pointed out, that was called the Reconstruction period. But in terms of things like convict leasing, the convict leasing went from when slavery ended with the 13th Amendment. Do you know it went all through the 1800s? So that's 35 years. It went all the way through the 1900s. It was never addressed until, and not totally, he went for a while, but eventually, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the first president that addressed the whole situation of convict leasing. So we're talking about a minimum of 60, 70 something years until it finally was addressed. Because that was on the lips of the NAACP, major churches, Urban League and all of them. The number one problem in America was lynching, but number two, close number two was convict leasing. So that was addressed, and slowly but surely, under FDR, who had 4 terms as president, he was the one who eventually, with the use of not only federal troops, but slowly but surely, he used his bully pulpit to slow down and stem the tide. Still to this day, black men are historically arrested and put in jail for little to no provocation of their own, but it happens.
They just passed the anti-lynching law. Just.
Yes, the sister's right. She points out they just passed an anti-lynching law. But one part about it she failed to mention. You want to say what it is, or should I say? It was anonymous. I think I'm saying the word right, anonymous. anti-lynching laws, no one went on record voting.
Right.
Can you imagine that? You so afraid of the backlash from other white people that it's not recorded that you voted to say, okay, it's time
Stop
to
this
stop
madness.
lynching.
Stop this madness.
Yeah.
Boy,
You know, here we are,
In the year
post
2000
160 years.
2020.
Yeah, all these years after slavery, and yet it's just recently. It wasn't during while Obama was in, or yeah,
Biden signed
or was it Trump was in?
it. Biden signed
It was Biden. Okay, right. What am I saying? Because he, right. Because Biden, right, exactly. Biden has only been in a year and a half.
But it holds no water.
Yeah, but it's better to have that because that's what who fought for that? Going back to what black woman?
Well, Ida B. Wells.
Well, you said it. I wanted to raise it. You said it. It was Ida B. Wells. She dedicated her entire life to anti-lynching laws.
They burned down so many newspapers.
So,
Yeah.
and they had to chase her because she used to write, what do you call that when you write without, no. When you write without saying your name?
Anonymous.
Ghostwriter. She was a ghostwriter for years because she was in the South and she knew her life was on the line to write anti-lynchings in her newspaper.
She was a publisher,
So
so she had control.
would,
Yeah, so she was a ghostwriter at that time. It's called another thing, but we'll go with ghostwriter. She was a ghostwriter.
all right, so,
You gotta look at the people, they,
oh, who, go ahead, another question?
Isn't, am I right or wrong, in the Constitution, do they still have 3/4 human being describing people of pigment?
Not
Has that
anymore.
been?
It was never in the
Oh, but
Constitution.
it wasn't the original. It wasn't the original.
Hold on.
That's the Supreme Court.
She's
No,
asking,
let her finish the
she's
question.
asking the
Well,
question.
that's the question, I'm wondering, is it still in? I thought it was, am I wrong? I thought 3/4 human being described people of
Fifth.
color, and it was in the
It was in the Constitution. You have to remember that, and I'm not saying in any way that white folks didn't feel that way, but we were reduced to an animal,
Exactly.
to chattel, because it was strategic. The South numbers were not as prominent as the North, so they needed leverage. So how could you get political leverage when the Northern, and I'll mention some cases why they wanted that political leverage? Because,
House of Representatives.
the U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, well, I'll get into that in the next one, why they wanted that political leverage. So what they did was they used slaves, and so since we were 3/4, it would take, if we were 3/4 of a human being, or 3/5, pardon me, not 3/4, 3/5, then that means it would take 9 to equal 6. So 9 to equal 6. So in doing that, you're just 2/3. So that they were able to add that to all of the white people, so they could have more members of Congress. So
I say
political
correctly. It was to determine how many representatives each state had,
yes,
because that goes by population.
yes,
And the Senate of every state only has 2.
2.
That's why there's 100 senators for 50 states.
Right, so you're
Only
talking
has
about,
2, but to make.
right,
South-
400, it's 34, if the number hasn't changed, it's 435 representatives in the House, and there's still to this day, as Sister pointed out, 100 senators. So it doesn't matter, that number hasn't changed. And,
Well, that's today. The time you're talking about, it was to maintain sectional balance,
yes,
right, north and south, so they would have.
That's
So they
correct.
began using 5 blacks to represent 3 whites.
yes,
So that's why it's called 3/5.
right,
Clause.
3/5 clause.
But it's no longer in the Constitution.
No.
No,
It was written up.
no.
They draw a line through it. But it's in the mind.
But it's in the minds because we traditionally have gotten 3/5 of justice. So if a white person did something and they would get 3/5 of what we would get in terms of
Punishment.
the punishment.
Justice, no.
So, you know, that kind of is still there in a real
So
sense.
they do with crack and
Oh,
cocaine.
so,
Anybody from the Zoom audience?
The Zoom.
Any question from the Zoom?
I'm looking at
Here-
y'all.
here or
You-
not.
You gotta see if they're on.
Anybody from the Zoom audience want to have a question for Mike? Okay.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're gonna get this get to this in part 2, but right after Reverend Allen formed the
Bishop
AME Bishop Allen AME Church, then we get into what do we do with these Africans? So they thought of repatriation to Liberia. Many in the black church voted against it. But they were promised, many were promised, we'll make you a bishop. Dr. Ben always talked about it. We'll make you a bishop if you vote for it. So many people ended up voting for repatriation to Liberia, and they were made bishops. Well, they weren't really bishops, but they were, upholders of the system.
Now, that was a part of what they call a recolonization act that a whole lot of black folks were against. Everybody was not for that, and you had some great people that were for it, and some people who were not for it, but for the most part, our people did not want to go back to Africa. They had spent their life here through all the hardships. They did not want to go back. So that's why, when all is said and done, even though people did go to Liberia, a significant amount went, the majority of us stayed and did not want to go back to Africa.
But it took up that stuff too.
What's that?
Marcus Messiah Garvey.
That was much later. That was much later. The Black Star Line,
Paul Cuffey.
Paul Cuffey,
He was a
Great
businessman.
abolitionist.
He was
A pilot. He was a pilot.
Businessman, right?
Business and a pilot.
And he bought a ship. He had that kind
Yeah,
of money.
yeah.
And he took, remember back in that day, that was,
Yeah.
homeboy was the joint. He took people
Yes.
from America back to Africa.
Would the anti-lynching law, does that just mean if they put a rope around your neck, or what if you get shot?
Well, when our people, and this was basically across the board, we called anything, whether it was a massacre, whether it was one person lynched, or whether it was a group shot, chased, hunted down, and killed. The language was lynching. So it didn't always mean a rope. If they call what happened to James Byrd in Texas,
He was dragged in
that's
his truck.
called a lynching.
Yeah, dragged behind the truck.
And he was dragged, and obviously at some point his body became dismembered. It was called a lynching. So we call killings lynchings, political lynchings, and what have you. So that's what a lynching constituted, just any type of unlawful murder, or some people will call that country justice, where they're gonna take you to the shed, which is what happened to Emmett Till. That was called lynching.
Did they just lynch Ahmaud Arbery, the brother who was jogging?
Yes,
That's a lynching.
and I'm glad you mentioned that. That is called a lynching also. Even though that was 3, I won't say vigilantes because he wasn't doing anything, he just jogged. In 3 days.
Racist.
they trapped him off and killed him, and then tried to act like they thought he was gonna steal or break in the house. But that's also called a lynching. So it's not always with a rope, right? It doesn't have to be a rope. It can be a gun, shotgun, or like I said, what happened in the till was a lynching. And I don't even think they used a rope. They beat him to death. His head was swollen 3-4 times the size, and they blew his brains out. And according to his mother, you could look at one side of his head and see daylight on the other. So even after they did all that, they still probably took his head out with a 45.
Why do they call what we do domestic terrorism, but not what they do?
Well, the same reason why Tarzan can be a lion. Tarzan, with nothing more than at best a knife in his hand, can be a lion. Well, the lion will never win as long as white folks tell the story. That's why he would get into it with a crocodile. And I'm not talking about what you see in Florida, alligator. I'm talking about his big cousin, the real thing, the crocodile. 20, them crocodiles over there at the Nile, 20, 22 feet, monsters. And Tarzan used to beat them with his knife. And even when they put him in that death spin and they spin him around, he would come out of the water alive and the crocodile would be dead.
But
And
wait,
if you ever saw the difference in a crocodile and alligators, you don't want to be a crocodile.
That's Hollywood for you.
but wait, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but in Birmingham, that legal, he was able to document 4,040 lynchings in the South. And what he wanted to do, he established, there's a memorial, I was there, I took a lot of pictures, memorial and a museum,
Yeah.
okay? He wanted to put a sign on the various locations where blacks were lynched. And of course, he got a lot of opposition. But at the memorial, he's got these planks hanging from the ceiling with the names, the counties, the various counties, and the names of each person who was lynched in each one of these things. And he's got a civil rights museum to go with it.
And they
But
have the dirt.
for the most part, a lot of people don't know about it. It's called the Lynching Initiative. Okay?
Okay, well, one thing we have to remember,
And they took the
for
dirt.
everyone that we remember, there are 5 or 10 that's still unknown to this day. There's not a building in the South that if you don't dig up under it, you will see Africans.
Yeah.
It's all over the place. So when we argue and fight, which we rightfully should, for African burial grounds, they're everywhere.
Right.
Every swamp, everywhere one can imagine, they killed. If you look at the book Sanctuary or
100 years of
100
lynching.
Years of Lynching,
Yeah.
those books, it only scratches the surface.
Because
And
they
that's
have
what wasn't
graves
on.
too. But I like.
There were massive graves, graves, punch bowls, all
Yes,
over the place.
and they're still there. I wanted to add to what the doctor said. They took the dirt also from under the tree, which held the blood. This is another way they identify people,
That's a fact.
with DNA. They took the dirt, and the dirt's in the museum.
Well, DNA is a recent phenomenon, so if you have relatives way down in the South, you might not be able to make a connection. But she's so right about blood being found. So that's one thing to consider, that for every individual, there are 5 or 10 that we don't know anything about.
It's interesting because there are people who are talking about cancel culture, but they're canceling the knowledge of what happened to our people. Okay? They're the one that they're objecting to forgetting about the Civil War,
Right, in other
criminals,
words, they have a problem with critical race theory. That's the thing. CRT, critical race theory. And they were strategic in naming it, basically naming it that, because now, whenever you talk in history, accurate history, things that actually happen, things that there's evidence of, you call it critical race theory, and now you utilize cancel culture of those woke people, because that's a way of strategically saying that you making something up when you know it's true. We can bring up massacre after massacre where black people were killed. And so they found a way to trivialize it and write it off. They say, that's critical race theory. No. But you say, no, these are things that happen. You take the words like enslaved Africans, and now you call them indentured servants. And most of these books now are being rewritten in places like Texas. So they're changing the whole history. You know, who knows, in another 100 years, they might claim Duke Ellington was white. You know, one of the greatest writers. You know, they might even say Michael Jackson was white and show you a white picture of Michael Jackson. And it doesn't matter what he made himself to look like. We know deep down he was a Jackson. And all those Jacksons are like my complexion.
But what about Hannibal? Did they change it?
Well, yeah, Victor Mature played him in the movie. You know, if you're into the movies, Victor Mature, white man, great actor, played Hannibal. And I think Malcolm once told a story when he said that Malcolm was at a lecture at one of those Ivy League schools.
Harvard.
It was Harvard, yeah. And Malcolm said that Hannibal was black. And so in the crowd after the lecture, it was a crowd of white, young, enthusiastic students asking Malcolm questions. And it was one black person there that had a really trouble look on his face. He was upset, I dare say, he was enraged. And finally, Malcolm said, brother, is there a problem? And the brother said, yeah. And Malcolm said, well, what is it? He said that, well, you said Hannibal was black. And Malcolm said, well, Hannibal was black. Now, can you prove to me that he wasn't? Do you know what the guy said? Now, he goes to Harvard now. The black man from Harvard said, I saw Hannibal in the movies, and he was white. Now, this is a Harvard student.
But that's one of the better Harvard students.
Now, can you imagine that? You go to Harvard, and we're talking about the Punic Wars, and you mentioned you saw a movie with Victor Mature, and he was white. Well, you know, all the movies that you see about Kemet, ancient Kemet, don't they use all Europeans?
That's Hollywood for you.
So, you know, if there's any more questions, we'll stop there.
Questions,
For part two, we'll get into individuals.
Anybody got a question, Zoom audience? Has anybody got a question, Zoom audience? Zoom audience?
So let me end by just saying that, just thank you so much, and that we're gonna make sure that we have Dr. Munderson, and of course we'll bring back Dr. Kava. We're gonna bring back the irritated gene. So we're gonna have a lot of things that's on the plate, and we want to publicly thank our brother Ray Ray, because you all don't know all the work that he does behind the scenes, and he'll never tell you, but it's hard work that he does as the director of the Dr. William Mackey Brooklyn Lecture Group. He does a lot of work, and the snacks, and so many other things. He's on the phone doing things, and just want to everybody to publicly thank him for the work. And with that, Hotep.
Let's keep going like the crazy hell. You know, unmute yourself. Thank you for the audience that came out and supported Brother Mike. Part 2 will be in 2 weeks.
Right.
Don't go nowhere. We're gonna take a quick picture. It will be on YouTube if you want to get into it. If you don't want to get into it, then